Funerals are not just about mourning the dead. Sometimes they are about who is already sharpening their knives. The church smelled faintly of lilies and old wood polish, the kind of scent that lingers in places where time itself feels hesitant to move. They called it my funeral, but it felt more like theater. Everyone dressed the part, reciting lines of sympathy they did not mean. I was not in the pews, of course. I was in the casket at the front, my body lying still, but my voice was very much alive. Because what they did not know was that I had left behind a letter and a plan. I had watched them for years, the forced smiles, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the sudden concern for my health whenever I coughed too long. Love, in some hearts, had turned rotten. Greed, envy, hunger. And hunger, my dears, always sharpens the knives. So when they gathered for my final goodbye, I saw not grief, but calculation. The pews groaned beneath the weight of my family. My son, Harold, sat in the front row, his shoulders squared like a man bracing for battle. His wife clung to a lace handkerchief, her face painted in a shade of grief that shimmered just enough to draw sympathetic glances. Oh, she loved attention, even at my funeral. Behind them, my granddaughter Elise fidgeted with her veil. There was something in her eyes, that spark I once had before life, and people wore it down. Suspicion, maybe. Or quiet defiance. She was not like the rest. Or at least, I dared to hope. The rest filled in the pews, cousins who had not darkened my doorway in a decade, nephews who only called when they needed help, and a great niece whose name I barely remembered. Funny, isn't it? How the promise of a will summons family faster than love ever could. And then there was Mr. Claiborne, my lawyer, sitting off to the side like a crow waiting for the storm to break. His leather briefcase never left his lap. That briefcase held my words, my final move in a game they never realized I was playing. Before Pastor Hill could close his Bible, he cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Before we conclude, he said, Mrs. Shaw left a special message for all of you. A murmur swept through the room. Two men wheeled out an old television, its static hum filling the silence. Then, flicker, light, and there I was. Not in flesh, but in film. My face, aged yet strong, eyes sharp as ever. If you are watching this, I began, looking straight into the lens as if I could pierce through time itself, then it means I have gone. But don't look so sad. I always said I would outlive most of you, and in some ways, I suppose I have. A few uneasy laughs rippled through the pews. Harold's wife gave a tight smile, clearly irritated that even from the grave, I still had a better sense of timing than she did. I know why you are really here, I continued, my tone cooling like metal in the forge. Not for me, for what I left behind. The house. The land. The money. You came with your black suits, your veils, and your rehearsed tears. But don't fool yourselves, I know every one of you. I have seen what greed does when it thinks no one is watching. A rustle moved through the room, some eyes darted down, others narrowed in indignation. I have written my will, I said, leaning closer to the camera. But like me, it isn't simple. It isn't kind. It isn't even fair. It's a trap, and only those who deserve it will escape unscathed. Gasps. A few muffled curses. One nephew muttered, "What the hell does that mean?" Loud enough for everyone to hear. On the screen, I smiled, the kind of smile that knows exactly what's coming. And one more thing, nothing I leave behind comes without strings. Not anymore. Then the screen went black. The silence that followed felt heavier than the coffin itself. Even the air did not dare move. Mr. Claiborne finally stood, straightening his tie like a man stepping into his cue. Ladies and gentlemen, he began smoothly, your mother, grandmother, and Ev left behind very specific instructions regarding the reading of her will. We will proceed immediately. Chairs creaked, feet shuffled. Harold cleared his throat. Let's get on with it, he said, voice clipped, too impatient for someone supposedly in mourning. Claiborne opened his briefcase with a deliberate click. From it, he drew a thick bundle of papers tied with a ribbon, setting them on the podium as though he were unveiling sacred scripture. "This," he said, "is the last will. But as you have already gathered, it's not straightforward." A murmur passed through the pews like wind through brittle leaves. "Your late matriarch," he continued, "has divided her estate in a manner I have never encountered before. There are stipulations." "Stipulations?" hissed my daughter-in-law. "What kind of stipulations?" He did not answer her. He simply adjusted his glasses and began to read. "I, Margaret Evelyn Shaw," he intoned, "being of sound mind, do hereby declare this my final will and testament. To my heirs, I leave not only my possessions but the truth, and you will find that both come at a price." I could almost hear their hearts beating faster. Claiborne continued, "No asset shall pass freely to anyone without conditions being met. Should any heir act in greed, deceit, or haste, their share shall be revoked immediately and reassigned." "That's absurd," one cousin blurted. "She can't do that." Claiborne did not even glance up. "Oh, she can." And she did. He turned another page, voice measured and firm. "Furthermore, one envelope remains sealed until such time as the heirs believe themselves victorious. Only then may it be opened." The words hung there like a curse. "What envelope?" Harold demanded. Claiborne reached once more into his briefcase, hand emerging slowly with a thick, wax-sealed envelope. Its crimson seal gleamed faintly under the dim church lights. Across the front, in my unmistakable handwriting, it read, "To be opened only if they think they have already." 1. The shift in the room was instant. The grief turned to dread. The whispers became K and I halves. Harold's wife leaned into him, whispering something sharp. Elisa's eyes locked on the envelope, her fingers tightening around her veil. I could almost see her thinking, wondering, "What does it mean?" Someone asked, their voice trembling. Claiborne set the envelope on the podium, folding his hands. "It means," he said quietly, "your mother anticipated this very moment. And she left behind instructions that may change everything." The murmurs turned to chaos. "She is trying to pit us against each other." A nephew shouted. "Oh, please," another sneered, "like you were not already planning to grab the biggest share." Finger pointing. Accusations. Every old resentment I had spent years pretending did not exist came clawing to the surface. And through it all, that envelope sat in the open, quiet, patient, heavy with the weight of secrets. Claiborne raised a hand, his voice slicing through the noise. "Enough. The formal reading continues tomorrow morning at my office. Until then, I suggest you reflect, because once this envelope is opened..." He paused, letting the silence deepen. "There will be no turning back." Every gaze returned to that single envelope, its wax seal unbroken, my handwriting like a ghostly whisper across its front. "To be opened only if they think they've already won." It lay there like a Lehaf thing, waiting. And somewhere, beneath the polished coffin lid, I imagined my boys curling through their thoughts, my final whisper echoing between their ribs, "Do you still think you've already won?" _______________________________________________________________ Greed makes people predictable, and I counted on that. The moment the lawyer finished reading the first half of my will, I could almost feel the air change. The room was heavy, not with grief, but with calculation. Eyes darted, lips tightened, and every polite nod became a mask stretched too thin. My children and grandchildren thought they understood what came next. Divide the estate, sign the papers, cash the inheritance. They believed it would be quick, simple, painless. But nothing about my life had ever been simple. And I made sure my death would not be either. Because when you have lived among wolves long enough, you learn their habits, their scent, their timing, their hunger. And if you know how a wolf moves, you can build the perfect trap. The lawyer, Mr. Claiborne, cleared his throat, his tone calm but cautious. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded a second page, thinner than the rest, its edges almost translucent with age. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at my family, and began, per Mrs. Whitmore's express instructions, the inheritance shall not be granted by bloodline alone, but by trial. A collective murmur rippled through the room. My eldest son, Charles, leaned back in his chair, smirking as though he had just heard a bad joke. Trial? He scoffed. What is this, some kind of game show? But Miriam, my daughter, always the percept I have won, did not laugh. Her hands were clenched in her lap, white at the knuckles. She felt it already. The shift. The danger. Claiborne continued, each heir must fulfill a condition set forth in these pages. Some conditions may be acts of service. Others may require confession. Only when all conditions are met shall the estate be divided. The room exploded into noise. This is insane, Charles barked. She can't control us from the grave. Eric, my grandson, snapped, his voice sharp with irritation. Tasks. Confessions. What is this nonsense? But then Claiborne lifted his hand, silencing them with one word. She is. The room fell utterly still. He turned toward a mahogany box on his desk. A faint red light blinked from within, a camera, one I had arranged long before my last breath. And then, my voice filled the room. If you are watching this, I said, calm and clear, then it means I'm gone. And it means you have already started circling like vultures. Gasps. Shifting. Chairs. Eyes wide. Don't deny it. I know you, every lie, every excuse, every secret. I raised you, remember? I also know that greed makes people predictable. That's why you are here. That's why I left you these conditions. Fail them, and you fail me. And if you fail me, you lose everything. The silence afterward was colder than winter. For once, even Charles had nothing to say. Claiborne shuffled the papers, voice low but deliberate. Condition 1, Charles Whitmore must return the family heirloom watch he pawned without permission. Charles froze. His jaw tightened, eyes flickering toward the floor. That's ridiculous, he snapped. She did not even know. The lawyer did not blink. She knew. A few stifled laughs rippled from the back rows, the kind that cut deeper than any insult. Charles had always been the favorite son, the golden boy. But now, the golden watch had become his chain. Condition 2, Claiborne read, Miriam Whitmore must admit, in front of her siblings, the true reason she stopped speaking to her father 3 years before his death. Miriam's head snapped up. Her lips parted, just slightly, but no words came out. She stared at the floor, as if the truth itself were written there. She had spent years pretending it was nothing, a difference of opinion, she had always said. But I knew better. I had lived with her silence. And now, that silence was a sentence. Condition 3, Eric Whitmore must account for the missing $20,000 from the family business account. Eric's eyes widened. That's not fair. That was bookkeeping. Mistakes. But even his own mother turned to look at him then, suspicion sharp and sudden. The truth has a smell, metallic, sour. And in that moment, the room reeked of it. Claiborne turned to the next line. Condition 4, Lydia Whitmore must reveal the name of the person who encouraged her to forge my signature on last year's property documents. Lydia gasped. That's a lie. She stammered. She has no proof. Her hands trembled. Her lips quivered. But no one came to her defense. Because I did not need proof. I had timing. And I knew the moment this line was read aloud, the guilty would expose themselves, not with confessions, but with fear. Then came the pause. Claiborne hesitated, as though weighing whether to continue. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost reverent. The final condition reads as follows. The one who betrayed me first will lose everything. The rest will divide what remains. The room went utterly silent. What does that even mean? Miriam whispered. How are we supposed to know who betrayed her first? Eric demanded. But Claiborne only shrugged, eyes unreadable. The instructions do not clarify. He did not need to say more. I could already imagine their minds spinning, racing back through every secret deal, every hidden betrayal. Because I had written it that way, a question with no answer, designed to make them turn on each other until the truth clawed its way out. Years before, I had watched them shift, from children who loved me, to adults who measured affection in inheritance value. When my husband died, he warned me, "They will circle the moment I am gone." He was right. But instead of fighting them, I studied them. Every lie, every favor, every whispered plan. I did not write my will to distribute wealth. I wrote it to hold up a mirror. And I knew exactly what they would see when they looked inside. Because guilt does not need to be proven. It needs only to be remembered. Back in that stuffy lawyer's office, chaos was blooming like wildfire. Eric pointed a finger at Lydia. "She is lying. She is always lying." Lydia stepped back. "You stole from Grandma first." Charles stood, his voice rising. "You are all pathetic." And Miriam, trembling in her chair, muttered something no one caught, but the look in her eyes said enough. She knew more than she had ever dared to admit. Every voice overlapped. Every lie tangled. And in the noise, none of them noticed the faint red light on. The lawyer's desk still blinking, recording every moment, every accusation, every confession disguised as anger. Just as I intended. Finally, Mr. Claiborne rapped his knuckles on the desk, restoring a fragile silence. "You have your conditions," he said firmly. "Until they are met, not a single penny of the Whitmore estate will be released." That was Mrs. Whitmore's final word. One by one, they stormed out, Charles muttering curses, Miriam wiping away silent tears, Lydia trembling as Eric slammed the door behind them. The hallway echoed with footsteps and resentment. And when it was finally quiet, the lawyer exhaled and sank into his chair. There, on the desk beside him, lay a thick envelope. The same one he had not dared to touch. Wax sealed. Heavy. My handwriting scrawled across the front, to be opened only if they think they have already won. He stared at it for a long while, the kind of look that comes when you know a secret is breathing just inches away. What was inside? Another revelation? Another twist? Or perhaps something worse? He did not open it. Not yet. But deep down, he understood what I had built. This was not just a will. It was a fuse. And the moment they thought they had beaten me, that envelope would burn. The Whitmore legacy was not over. It was only beginning to unfold, one condition at a time. Underscore, 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 underscore. The hardest part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's realizing who had the face to smile while doing it. The family returned to the lawyer's office the following week like condemned prisoners awaiting sentencing. No one spoke. Not even a whisper. They avoided each other's eyes, terrified that one stray glance might betray more than words ever could. The lawyer looked older this time, or perhaps just wary. He placed a thick folder on the polished desk, its spine bulging with secrets and dust. "This," he began, voice low, deliberate, "was provided by your grandmother herself. Documents. Statements. Deeds. She wanted one of you exposed. And she left no ambiguity. The air thickened like storm clouds." Miriam clutched her shawl tighter. Charles tapped his foot in sharp, nervous bursts. Eric kept adjusting his tie, strangling himself a little more with every pull. The lawyer opened the folder. "Years ago, before Mrs. Whitmore's health declined," he continued, "someone attempted to transfer ownership of her secondary property, the lake house. The deed was altered, signatures forged. The attempt failed only because Mrs. Whitmore noticed the discrepancies and quietly reversed it. But she kept the proof. A collection has shattered the silence." "Forged?" Miriam whispered. "You mean one of us?" "Yes," the lawyer said flatly. "And your grandmother's instructions were explicit. The guilty party forfeits everything." Every heartbeat in the room became a drum of dread. Then came my voice again, her voice, from the recording that refused to die. Do you know what betrayal tastes like? Paper. Ink. A signature you never gave. One of you decided my name was just a line you could scribble to your liking. That line cut deeper than any knife. And now, we'll see who wielded it. The lawyer lifted the damning document. The ink had faded with time, but the name glared through the years. Lydia. Her face strained to hash. No, that's not true. I did not. Someone set me up. But her voice trembled, thin, brittle, unraveling with every syllable. Charles barked a bitter laugh. So the little angel was not so angelic after all. Miriam flinched, torn between disgust and heartbreak. Eric muttered, almost to himself, I knew it. She was too close to Grandma's accounts. Lydia's hand shook as she stood. I was desperate. Do you have any idea what it's like watching everyone else take and take while I was treated like a child? She never trusted me with anything. She was right not to, Miriam snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. The lawyer's palm cracked against the desk. Enough. Mrs. Whitmore's orders are final. Lydia Whitmore, you are disinherited. Lydia stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. Her fingers searched the air for something, anything, to hold on to. But there was nothing left. Lydia, you smiled at me every Sunday dinner, poured my tea with steady hands. Well, those same hands signed my name as if I were already gone. Do you know what that makes you? Not just a liar. Not just a thief. But the first cut. And the first cut loses everything. A choked sob escaped Lydia. Then her grief twisted into something darker. Her lips curled, no longer the gentle granddaughter, but the woman beneath the mask. You all think you were better? She hissed. You think Grandma did not know your secrets too? Just wait. Just wait until she drags each of you into the light. Her chair scraped violently across the marble. It toppled, echoing like thunder. Then she was gone, heels striking the hallway like gunfire. Silence filled the void she left behind. Charles stared after her, smirk erased. Miriam's trembling hands clenched her rosary. Eric chewed his lip until a bead of red bloomed. Because Lydia's words weren't wrong. If one betrayal had been unearthed, how many more waited beneath the surface? That was the beauty of my trap. It was not about punishing one of them, it was about making all of them feel the noose tighten. If one could be revealed, then none were safe. Fear is a sharper blade than greed. And fear makes even the most careful liar slip. The lawyer closed the folder with a final, Desi's I have snap. We will reconvene next week to address the remaining conditions. Until then, I advise you all to reflect. No one moved. Miriam rose first, clutching her purse like armor. The others followed, slow, hollow, dragging invisible chains behind them. But Lydia was not gone. Not entirely. Outside, where her footsteps had faltered, something small gleamed on the courthouse steps, a brass key, its surface kissed by the pale light. The lawyer found it after the others had left. He turned it over in his palm, the leather fob cracked with age, the engraving faint but clear, Lydia, box number 27, First National Bank. He frowned, slipping the key into an envelope. Grandma's would not mention any safety deposit box. At least, not yet. The camera blinked red as the lawyer slid the envelope into his drawer. He paused, staring into the lens, as though addressing the ghost behind it. What else did you set in motion, Mrs. Whitmore? He murmured. And somewhere, in that still office, though the recording had ended long ago, my voice lingered in the air like smoke, enough to finish what they started. Underscore 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 secrets don't stay buried, they wait in locked boxes. The key burned like a coal in Charles's pocket. He had not told the others he would taken it from the lawyer's desk, palming it in one swift, practiced move when no one was watching. For days, it felt like it pulsed against his leg, whispering possibilities, temptations, and danger. By the time he reached First National Bank, his nerves were raw. He had not slept. The echoes of Lydia's disgrace still haunted him, her face twisted in fury and humiliation. He did not want to end up like her. No, he wanted to stay ahead. The clerk barely looked up when he presented the key. "Box 27, she said simply, leading him through the steel door into the cool, sterile vault lined with endless rows of identical metal faces. When the lock clicked, the box slid free with surprising weight. Charles carried it to the private table, hands trembling slightly. For a moment, he hesitated. What if this was another of Grandma's traps? What if her reach extended even here, past her grave, through the ink, through the iron? But greed is always louder than fear. He opened the box. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied with a ribbon yellowed by age. A small stack of black and white photographs. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope, her sharp handwriting cutting. Across its surface, "For when the vultures circle." People think secrets are buried underground. But the truth? Secrets prefer to sit high on a shelf, behind a lock, waiting for the greedy to come digging. Because when you open a locked box, you don't just find what I left behind. You find yourself. Charles untied the letters first. His eyes flicked over the ink, notes exchanged between Lydia and Eric years ago. Schemes. Calculations. Talk of shifting accounts, of convincing their father to change the estate. Proof. The photographs were worse. Miriam, in places she swore she'd never been. Arm in arm with men she had publicly despised. Laughing, smiling, living a second life in shadows. And then came the envelope. His fingers shook as he tore it open. Inside, a single sheet. Crisp. Legal. Stamped. A will amendment. Charles' mouth went dry. He read it once. Then again. And again. The amendment contradicted everything in the official will they had fought over in the lawyer's office. This version restored large portions of the estate to Grandma's discretion, with one chilling clause: final decisions would be revealed only if her heirs betrayed her trust. He could hear her voice again, soft, spectral, but steady. "You all thought inheritance was wealth. But wealth is nothing compared to reputation. I knew each of you carried sins you'd never want the world to see. So I built my will as a mirror. Whoever stares into it too long will see themselves reflected back, for all to judge." Charles shoved the papers back into the box, his palms slick with sweat. The others could never see this. They'd destroy him. He needed control. He needed silence. But when he stepped out of the vault, Miriam was waiting. Her eyes darted to the box in his hands. "What did you find?" she demanded. Charles faltered. "Nothing important. Old photographs. Some scraps." But Miriam knew that look. Her expression hardened. "You are lying." Eric appeared behind her, stepping from the corridor's shadow. His smile was thin and cruel. "So, Grandma left something behind, did not she? Something you don't want us to see." Charles clutched the envelope tighter. "It's nothing. Just old letters." Miriam lunged, quick and vicious, snatching the envelope before he could react. The paper tore slightly, but her eyes caught the heading. Her breath caught. "An amendment," she whispered. Eric's smirk deepened. Well. Looks like Lydia was not the only one caught in the trap." Miriam's face drained of color as she read. Each line carved a new crack across her composure. "If this gets out, if anyone sees these photographs, these letters," she stopped. The thought alone hollowed her voice. Charles reached for the pages again, desperate. But Miriam's grip was iron. She looked up, eyes cold, voice low and dangerous. We can't let this get out. That was always the point. I knew they would turn on each other. Not out of loyalty, but out of fear. Fear is the chain that binds the guilty tighter than any law. But chains strain. And eventually, they snap. The three of them stood in the dim corridor, breathing hard, eyes darting like cornered animals. None noticed the clerk watching nervously from behind the counter, with a small surveillance camera blinking red in the corner. The safety deposit box was not just filled with secrets. It was a test. And the moment Miriam whispered those words, the trap began to close. Miriam stuffed the amendment back into its envelope, clutching it against her chest like a shield. Her eyes glistened, not with guilt, but with raw, electric fear. She leaned close to Charles and Eric, voice barely audible. If anyone finds out what's in here, we're all finished. And in that fragile, trembling whisper, the quiet war Grandma had planned finally began. Underscore 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 underscore. A family feud in private is chaos. In court, it's carnage. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and varnish, a place where wars were not fought with fists, but with sharpened tongues and paper knives. When the Whitmore family arrived, they wore masks. Polished smiles, pressed suits, pearl necklaces, freshly shined shoes. But beneath that polish clung the scent of rot, fear, greed, and betrayal heavy as perfume no one could wash off. The judge, an old man with hawk's eyes, presided from his high seat. His gaze stripped people bare, layer by layer, until the truth underneath had nowhere left to hide. On one side sat Charles, Miriam, and Eric, united in appearance, fractured in soul. They pushed forward the official will, confident and composed, heirs who believed the law could be bent like soft clay. Their attorney, a silver-tongued viper in a gray suit, radiated arrogance. On the other side sat Lydia, disgraced, defiant, clutching a worn folder that might as well have been a torch ready to set the room ablaze. And above them all, like a ghost threading through the air, hung Grandma's voice. Not in body, but in design, her final trap already in motion. They thought my game ended at the grave. But the grave is where the real game begins. I knew every move before they made it. Because greed is predictable. And predictable people are easy to outwit. The proceedings began. The clerk unfolded the pristine document, the official version, and began to read. Each word sliced through the silence, clean and final, every property, every account divided among the family. Except one name. Lydia's. A ripple of whispers rolled through the gallery. Charles crossed his arms with smug satisfaction. Miriam's calm mask slept for half a heartbeat, her fingers twitching in her lap. Eric smirked, savoring the victory. But Lydia did not move. She just waited, quiet, coiled, dangerous. The judge tapped his pen. Objections. The air shifted. Lydia rose. Her voice was steady, sharp enough to draw blood. Yes, Your Honor. I object. Because what you have in your hands is not the whole will. There's an amendment. A current of shock pulsed through the room. The opposing lawyer laughed, a snake's hiss dressed as charm. An amendment? Preposterous. My clients have the verified document. Anything else is hearsay. Lydia smiled, small, knowing, lethal. Then let's test that. She opened her folder and spread the contents like cards at a final table. Photographs. Letters. Notes in Grandma's unmistakable script. And finally, an envelope, torn but whole. The amendment. Truth is heavy. When you drop it on a room, it does not just land, it shatters everything. The judge took the envelope with deliberate care. He slit the seal, unfolded the crisp page, and adjusted his glasses. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the ceiling fan seemed to stop mid-turn. Then, he began to read. The words carved the silence clean in half. The amendment declared that the will's power was conditional. bound by trust, loyalty, and moral integrity. Any act of deceit, forgery, fraud, manipulation would nullify every claim. If the family betrayed her, the inheritance would revert. Not to the betrayers, not to the estate, but to the one who had been cut out to protect her from the wolves. Lydia. The sound that followed was chaos in slow motion, a chorus of gasps, curses, and stunned silence. Miriam's complexion drained to porcelain. Eric muttered an oath under his breath. Charles' knuckles turned wide around the table's edge. Their lawyer rose, voice sharp with panic. This is absurd. The document could be fabricated, the signatures forged. But Lydia was not finished. She drew the final card from her folder, a notarized statement, signed, sealed, authenticated by the very attorney who had drafted Grandma's estate years ago. The same man who had verified every line of her final will. The same man whose seal gleamed red beneath the courthouse lights. Authenticity, beyond question. You can forge signatures. You can twist words. But you cannot outwit someone who knows you better than you know yourself. Every lie you told, I wrote into the script. The courtroom disintegrated into panic. Miriam demanded time to review. Eric slammed his hand against the table, shouting about fairness. Charles hissed that it was all a setup. But the ink did not lie. The seal did not lie. And their betrayal, already proven, spoke louder than any defense. The judge leaned back slowly, studying the document with weary gravity. Every eye followed him. Every heartbeat waited for his next breath. Lydia stood motionless, pulse pounding, a single thought burning in her chest. Please, see her truth. The judge removed his glasses, folded them, and pressed the bridge of his nose. The silence stretched thin as wire. Then, deliberately, he lifted the amendment, holding it between his fingers as though it weighed the world. His voice, when it came, carried through every corner of the chamber. This changes everything. The camera lingers on Lydia, a lone figure standing beneath courtroom light, her reflection trembling across the polished floor. Behind her, the family collapses into stunned disbelief. And in the faint hum of silence, a familiar echo rises. Grandma's voice, calm, certain, final. Fire does not destroy the truth. It only burns away what's false. The grave is silent, but I was still speaking. The courtroom was frozen in the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound like thunder. Dust hung in the golden sunlight slanting through tall arched windows, each particle suspended like a secret waiting to be told. And then, finally, the stillness cracked. The judge exhaled, lowered his glasses, and looked straight at the family gathered before him. His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the gravity of what he was about to say. This clause changes everything. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, rippling outward, unstoppable. And if ghosts could laugh, I would have laughed then. Because this was it. The moment I had written into destiny. The moment when every lie they had told, every betrayal they would whispered in the dark, turned back to strangle them. You see, my will was not written in ink. It was written in foresight. I had lived long enough to understand one simple, eternal truth: greed makes people predictable. My family thought themselves clever. My children, my nieces, my nephews, they believed they could twist words, forge signatures, manipulate dying men, and outsmart an old woman whose hand shook when she poured her tea. But I was never shaking from weakness. I was shaking from restraint. So I built a trap. A beautiful, elegant, merciless trap. The clause was simple enough to overlook any heir proven to have acted with deceit, coercion, or greed in pursuit of this inheritance forfeits their claim entirely. But the brilliance was not in the words. It was in the definition. Because greed was not theirs to interpret, it was mine. I left behind my measure of it, recorded in letters, diaries, voice tapes, and confessions locked away in my private vault. Every act of betrayal, every whisper of manipulation, catalogued, signed, and sealed. When they walked into that courtroom, they weren't heirs. They were defendants in a trial they did not know had already been judged. The tension inside the courtroom was suffocating. Eyes darted. Hands trembled beneath polished tables. The smell of expense, perfume, and nervous sweat mingled in the air. The first to break was Clara, my eldest, always the loudest when guilt pressed against her conscience. She shot to her feet so fast her chair screeched. "This is outrageous," she shouted. Mother did not know what she was signing. She was confused. She was not in her right mind. "Oh, Clara, you always thought tears were armor." The judge did not even blink. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his tone as sharp as a knife, "your mother left behind recordings. Handwritten notes. Even a video testimony." Clara froze. A video? That word sliced through her like a blade. Because that was the one thing none of them had expected, that I had spoken to them from beyond the grave. They dimmed the lights. A screen flickered to life. There I was, older, frilier, but with eyes bright as ever. Candlelight glowed beside me, and I spoke directly to the camera. "If you are watching this," I said, my voice calm and steady, "then you have already made your move. Don't bother denying it. I know who you are. And I know what you have done." A collection has filled the room. Then came the proof. One by one, my accusations unfolded like a slow, deliberate unmasking. Letters showing Clara pressuring her father during his final illness. Bank transfers revealed my nephew had siphoned funds from the family trust. Printed emails where my son, my own son, had plotted to contest the will before I had even passed. And then the final blow, the forged amendment, planted by my brother's son, meant to overwrite my true will. He had thought himself clever. He had not counted on the Real amendment being locked in a safety deposit box under my name, sealed, notarized, and time-stamped. Every secret, every scheme, laid bare under that sterile courtroom light. And through it all, my voice continued, "Did you think I would not see you? Did you think a mother, a sister, a grandmother could raise you and not recognize the scent of your lies?" They could not look at each other. They could not even look at themselves. Silence consumed the courtroom after the video ended. No one breathed. No one dared move. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, relentless, judgmental. The judge spoke again, voice heavy with finality. "According to the terms, as all heirs have engaged in deceit or coercion, their claims are void." For a heartbeat, there was quiet disbelief. Then, chaos. Clara shouted first. My son slammed his fist into the table. Lawyers barked over each other. My nephew cursed under his breath, face red with fury. But the judge raised a hand. "Order." And then he lifted a second envelope, one sealed with red wax, stamped with my initials. This, he said, was left to be opened only if the first clause was invoked. The room froze again. He broke the seal, unfolded the parchment, and began to read, "If no heir remains untainted, the estate shall pass not to the blood that betrayed me, but to the loyalty that stood by me. To the one who never asked for a penny, but gave me their time, their care, and their love." The name that followed sent a shock through the room. Not Clara. Not my son. Not a single one of the vultures was seated in their designer suits. The name was Emily. My granddaughter. The quiet one. The overlooked one. The girl they mocked for being soft, for staying behind to read to me when everyone else was too busy planning my funeral and counting what they thought was theirs. Her eyes widened. She did not even seem to breathe. "Grandma, why me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because, my darling, you were the only one who never betrayed me. The estate, the land, the fortune, the vault, everything I built and protected, was now hers." The aftermath was chaos incarnate. Clara's face crumpled into fury and disbelief. My son yelled until his voice broke. The nephew shouted about legal appeals and conspiracy. Lawyers scrambled like ants trying to make sense of the impossible. But the truth did not care for their tantrums. The clause was iron. The evidence airtight. My revenge, immaculate. They left that courtroom like ghosts, stripped of pride, wealth, and reputation. The same greed that drove them had devoured them whole. Their names, once respected, now echoed with scandal. Every whisper in town carried a piece of their disgrace. And I was gone. Buried, yes. But not silent. Never silent. Even in death, I was the loudest voice in the room. People often believe revenge dies with the body. They have it wrong. Revenge lies in the echoes, in the way the world remembers you, and how it forgets them. I did not take their money. I took their legacy. Do you know what true erasure is? It's not being cut out of a will. It's being written out of history. It's when the story ends, and your name does not appear in the credits. That was my victory. And Emily, she was not just the heir to my fortune. She was the heir to my warning. After everyone left, Emily remained seated in the quiet courtroom. The light had dimmed to amber. The echo of footsteps faded down the hall. She opened the envelope I left her. Inside was a smaller note, written in my hand. Emily, if you are reading this, then everything has gone as I foresaw. But remember, this inheritance is not a gift. It is a weapon. Use it wisely. Because greed never truly dies. It only waits. She folded the note, eyes brimming with both love and fear. And then, she heard something. A faint sound at the back of the courtroom. A door easing shut. A shadow slipping through the light. Someone had been there. Watching. Listening. Emily turned, but the figure was already gone. They thought they buried me. But really, I buried them.